"Feed me and I will heal your wife." The Hell's Angels didn't believe him until the impossible happened. In the desolate stretches of a forgotten highway, where the asphalt shimmered under the relentless sun and the air hung heavy with the scent of dust and exhaust, stood the formidable stronghold of the Hell's Angels. This wasn't just any chapter. This was the notorious Iron Scorpions, a brotherhood whose reputation preceded them like a storm front, leaving a trail of fear and grudging respect in its wake. Their clubhouse, a fortified compound of corrugated metal and reinforced concrete, bristled with an unspoken menace, a testament to their unwavering dominance in this unforgiving territory. Inside, the atmosphere was usually charged with a raw, untamed energy, a symphony of roaring engines, clinking beer bottles, and boisterous laughter. But recently, a chilling silence had descended upon the inner sanctum, a palpable gloom that even the most hardened members couldn't shake. The source of this unprecedented distress was the deteriorating health of Sarah, the wife of Razor, the undisputed president of the Iron Scorpions. Razor, a man whose very name evoked images of sharp edges and unforgiving steel, was a figure of legendary stoicism. His face, etched with years of hard living and countless battles, rarely betrayed emotion. Yet, beneath the veneer of invincibility, a deep, gnawing fear had taken root. Sarah, his beloved, his anchor in a world of chaos, was fading. Her illness, a relentless, insidious disease that doctors had failed to diagnose definitively, was slowly consuming her, robbing her of her vitality, her laughter, her very essence. She lay confined to her bed in a secluded part of the clubhouse, a shadow of her former vibrant self, her once bright eyes now clouded with pain and resignation. Razor had spared no expense, no effort, in his desperate quest to find a cure. He had consulted every doctor, every specialist, every alternative healer within hundreds of miles. He had flown them in on private jets, offered sums of money that would make lesser men blanch, and even resorted to methods that skirted the very edge of legality, all in the desperate hope of seeing a flicker of health return to his wife's face. But each attempt had ended in failure, each specialist shaking their head with a sympathetic, yet ultimately helpless, gaze. The Iron Scorpions, fiercely loyal to their president, felt his pain acutely. They watched, powerless, as their leader, a man who had faced down rival gangs and stood unyielding against overwhelming odds, was brought to his knees by an invisible enemy. The air in the clubhouse was thick with an uncharacteristic quiet, punctuated only by hushed conversations and the occasional, heavy sigh. It was during this period of profound despair that a peculiar figure appeared on the fringes of their territory. He was an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his clothes simple and worn, yet impeccably clean. He moved with a quiet dignity that seemed utterly out of place in the rugged landscape, and certainly incongruous with the violent reputation of the Hell's Angels. He didn't arrive on a roaring motorcycle or in a souped-up muscle car, he simply walked, emerging from the dusty horizon like a mirage. He carried no weapons, no visible means of protection, only a small, leather-bound satchel clutched in his frail hand. His presence was so unassuming, so devoid of threat, that the sentries initially mistook him for a lost wanderer or a harmless eccentric. When he finally reached the fortified gates of the Iron Scorpions compound, he didn't demand entry or raise his voice. He simply stood there, his gaze calm and unwavering, until one of the younger, more impressionable prospects, intrigued by his unusual presence, cautiously approached him. "What do you want, old man?" the prospect grunted, his hand resting instinctively on the holstered pistol at his hip. The old man's voice, when he finally spoke, was surprisingly clear and resonant, carrying an ancient wisdom that seemed to cut through the harshness of the environment. "I have come to heal your president's wife," he declared, his eyes meeting the prospect's with an unnerving intensity. "But first," he added, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, "you must feed me." The prospect, a burly young man named Spike, scoffed. He had heard countless such claims, seen dozens of charlatans and desperate fools try to take advantage of Razor's vulnerability. He was about to dismiss the old man with a harsh warning when something in the stranger's eyes, a profound certainty, gave him pause. He reported the encounter to Razor, expecting a swift and brutal dismissal. To his surprise, Razor, his face a mask of exhaustion, listened intently. The sheer audacity of the claim, combined with the old man's utterly fearless demeanor, piqued his curiosity. He had tried everything else. What harm could one more desperate gamble do? Razor emerged from the clubhouse, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants, their faces grim and wary. They eyed the old man with suspicion, their hands hovering near their weapons, ready to react to any perceived threat. This was their world, a brutal arena where weakness was exploited and trust was a luxury rarely afforded. A frail old man making such a bold claim seemed either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. "You say you can heal my wife?" Razor's voice was a low growl, a sound that had made many a man tremble. "And you want to be fed?" The old man nodded, his gaze unwavering, meeting Razor's hardened stare without a hint of fear. "Yes," he replied simply. "For 3 days, you must feed me the purest, most nourishing food your land can provide. No meat, no processed sugars, only what grows from the earth, prepared with care and intention. And in return, I will heal her." The iron scorpions erupted in a chorus of disbelieving snorts and murmurs. "Purest food? No meat?" One of them scoffed. "What is this, a damn health retreat?" Another chimed in, "You think a few salads are gonna cure what doctors couldn't?" Their skepticism was palpable, their eyes darting between Razor and the old man, expecting the president to unleash his legendary wrath. Razor, however, remained silent, his mind processing the strange request. He looked at the old man, then back at the grim faces of his men, then finally towards the window behind which his wife lay suffering. Desperation was a potent catalyst, capable of making even the most rational men consider the impossible. "And if you fail?" Razor's voice was dangerously low, a clear warning. The old man simply smiled, a gentle, knowing expression. "Then you will have lost nothing but a few meals, and I will be at your mercy." There was a quiet strength in his words, a conviction that resonated even with the hardened bikers. Razor studied him for a long, tense moment, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the desert wind. He was a man accustomed to making life and death decisions, to weighing risks and consequences. This was a gamble, a bizarre, almost ludicrous one, but the stakes were his wife's life, and he had run out of conventional options. "All right," Razor finally said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You'll be fed. But if you're playing us for fools, old man, you'll regret the day you ever set foot on Iron Scorpion's land." He motioned to Spike and another prospect, "Take him to the kitchen. Give him whatever he asks for, within his strange rules. And keep an eye on him. Every second." The prospects, still bewildered, led the old man away, their confusion evident in their wary glances. The old man walked calmly, as if he had expected this outcome all along, his small satchel still clutched in his hand. For the next 3 days, the clubhouse kitchen, usually a domain of greasy frying and hearty, calorie-laden meals, was transformed into a peculiar sanctuary. The old man, whose name they still did not know, supervised the preparation of his meals with meticulous care. He requested fresh fruits, organic vegetables, whole grains, and pure spring water. He spoke little, but when he did, his instructions were precise, his knowledge of plants and their properties surprisingly extensive. The prospects assigned to him, initially resentful of the unusual task, found themselves strangely captivated by his serene demeanor and the quiet wisdom that seemed to emanate from him. They watched as he ate his simple meals, slowly and deliberately, savoring each bite as if it were the most exquisite feast. Meanwhile, Sarah's condition remained unchanged, perhaps even worsening slightly. Razor would visit her often, his heart heavy, his hope flickering like a dying candle. The other Hell's Angels, despite their president's command, continued to express their skepticism, their whispers filled with doubt and thinly veiled mockery. "Razor's gone soft," some grumbled, letting some old hippie dictate our menu. But no one dared voice these opinions too loudly in Razor's presence. They understood the depth of his despair, and the slim chance he was clinging to. On the morning of the 4th day, the old man declared he was ready. He had finished his final meal, a simple bowl of berries and nuts, and now stood before Razor, his eyes clear and resolute. The entire Iron Scorpions chapter had gathered, a sea of leather and denim, their faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and outright disbelief. The tension in the room was electric, a silent question hanging in the air. Would this outlandish gamble pay off, or would it simply be another painful disappointment? Razor's face was unreadable, his heart a storm of conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe, desperately, but years of harsh reality had taught him to trust only what he could see and touch. "Bring me to your wife," the old man commanded, his voice devoid of arrogance, yet imbued with an undeniable authority. Razor nodded, and together, they walked towards the secluded room where Sarah lay. The air grew heavier with each step, the gravity of the moment pressing down on everyone present. The door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit chamber. Sarah lay still, her breathing shallow, her skin pale and translucent, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman she once was. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, held a vacant, distant look, as if she were already drifting away. The Hell's Angels watched from the doorway, their tough exteriors barely concealing their raw anxiety. The old man approached the bed, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't carry any medical instruments, no vials or potions. He simply sat on the edge of the bed, took Sarah's frail hand in his, and closed his eyes. A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by Sarah's faint, labored breaths. Razor watched, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white. He had put his last shred of hope, his deepest vulnerability, into the hands of this mysterious stranger. His men, who had seen him face down rival gangs with a roar, now watched him stand utterly helpless, his fate intertwined with the quiet actions of an old man. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The old man remained still, his eyes closed, his thumb gently stroking the back of Sarah's hand. The Hell's Angels shifted uneasily, their skepticism growing with each passing moment of inaction. What was he doing? Was this some kind of trick? Just as Razor was about to demand an explanation, a subtle change began to occur. A faint flush, barely perceptible at first, started to spread across Sarah's pale cheeks. Her breathing, which had been so shallow and erratic, began to deepen, becoming more regular, more robust. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered bikers, their eyes widening in disbelief. Then, Sarah stirred. Her fingers, which had been cold and limp, twitched, then gently squeezed the old man's hand. Her eyelids fluttered open again, but this time, there was a spark, a flicker of awareness that hadn't been there moments before. She looked around the room, her gaze slowly settling on Razor, a faint, almost bewildered smile gracing her lips. "Razor?" she whispered, her voice weak but clear, a sound that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock through everyone present. It was the first coherent word she had spoken in weeks. Razor, who had stood frozen in place, felt a tremor run through his entire body. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on his wife's face, searching for any sign that this was real, not just a cruel trick of his mind. The old man opened his eyes, a serene smile gracing his lips. He released Sarah's hand and gently patted her arm. "Rest now, child," he said softly. "The journey back to health has just begun." He then turned to Razor, his eyes holding a depth of wisdom that seemed to transcend time itself. "The body is a temple, Razor," he stated, his voice calm amidst the rising tide of astonishment. "It needs nourishment, not just for strength, but for healing. And sometimes, the most potent medicine is found not in a pill, but in the earth itself." The Hell's Angels, who had mocked the old man's dietary requests just days earlier, now stood in stunned silence. Their tough, cynical exteriors cracked, revealing raw awe and disbelief. What they were witnessing defied all their understanding, all their hardened experience. Sarah, the woman they had all but given up for dead, was not only awake but was speaking, her eyes holding a renewed spark of life. The impossible had happened. The old man, who had walked into their lives demanding only to be fed, had delivered on his audacious promise. But the story of Sarah's full recovery, and the true extent of the old man's remarkable abilities, was just beginning to unfold. They had seen a miracle, but they were yet to understand the full depth of what had transpired, or the profound lessons that were about to be revealed to the most fearsome motorcycle club on the highway. The air in Sarah's room, once thick with despair, now vibrated with an almost tangible energy. Razor stood transfixed, his eyes locked on his wife, his mind struggling to process the miracle unfolding before him. Her voice, a fragile whisper, had pierced through weeks of agonizing silence, a sound he had feared he would never hear again. The faint smile on her lips, the newfound light in her eyes, it was Sarah, truly Sarah, emerging from the shadowlands of her illness. A collective murmur, a mix of awe and bewilderment, swept through the Hell's Angels gathered at the doorway. Hardened men, who had faced down death without flinching, found themselves choked with emotion, some openly wiping tears from their weathered faces. Spike, who had first encountered the old man, felt a surge of vindication mixed with profound respect. He had seen something in the stranger's eyes, a certainty that had transcended the usual cynicism of their world. The old man, his serene smile unwavering, rose from the bed. He looked at Razor, his gaze piercing, yet filled with an immeasurable compassion. "She will need time, Razor," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "The body has begun its healing, but the mind and spirit must also mend. Continue to provide her with the nourishment I prescribed, and let her rest. Her full strength will return, but patience is key." Razor found his voice, a raw, almost choked sound. Who are you?" he managed, his legendary composure shattered. The old man simply smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "My name is not important. What matters is the truth I have shown you. The earth provides. We have forgotten its wisdom." With that, he turned and walked calmly out of the room, leaving behind a stunned Razor and a bewildered chapter of the Iron Scorpions. The next few days were a whirlwind of disbelief and cautious hope. Sarah, though still weak, continued to improve at an astonishing rate. She ate the simple, plant-based meals with an appetite she hadn't possessed in months, and her laughter, faint at first, began to echo through the clubhouse once more. Her recovery was undeniable, a living testament to the old man's inexplicable power. But with the miracle came a profound shift, and with the shift, inevitably, came conflict. The Hell's Angels were a brotherhood forged in steel, gasoline, and an unwavering adherence to their traditions. The old man's presence, and more importantly, his influence, began to chafe. While the initial awe was universal, the long-term implications of his teachings started to sow discord. Razor, deeply touched by his wife's recovery, found himself undergoing a transformation of his own. He listened intently to the old man, who, now that Sarah was stable, had taken up residence in a small, quiet corner of the compound. He didn't preach, he simply answered questions, offered observations, and occasionally requested specific herbs or remedies that the prospects were sent to gather from the surrounding desert. Razor began to see the world through a different lens, one that questioned the relentless violence, the endless pursuit of material gain, and the toxic lifestyle that had defined his existence. He found himself meditating, something he never would have conceived of before, following the old man's quiet guidance. This change in Razor did not go unnoticed, nor did it go unopposed. Hammer, Razor's longtime sergeant-at-arms, a man whose loyalty was unquestionable but whose mind was as unyielding as his namesake, was the first to voice his concerns. "Razor," he grumbled one evening, his voice a low rumble, "this old man, he's changing things. We're eating rabbit food, fetching weeds from the desert, and you're different. The club, it's not the same." Other members, particularly the older, more traditional ones, echoed Hammer's sentiments in hushed tones. They respected Razor, adored Sarah, and were grateful for the miracle, but the old man's gentle revolution was unsettling. Their roaring engine seemed to quiet, their boisterous laughter replaced by a contemplative silence. The very essence of the Iron Scorpions, their raw, untamed energy, felt muted. Some even began to question Razor's leadership, whispering that the old man had somehow weakened him. One particularly vocal dissident was Viper Johnson, a lean, worry man with a cruel glint in his eyes and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Viper had always been ambitious, and he saw Razor's newfound contemplative nature as an opportunity. "He's got the president wrapped around his little finger," Viper sneered to a small group of loyalists one night, gesturing towards the old man, who sat quietly by a meager fire, preparing some herbal tea. "Next thing you know, we'll be trading our bikes for bicycles and holding hands around a campfire." His words, laced with venom, found fertile ground among those who resented the shift. The old man, seemingly oblivious to the brewing resentment, continued his quiet work. He spent hours tending to a small garden he had started near the clubhouse, cultivating rare desert plants and explaining their properties to anyone who would listen. He never forced his views, never demanded adherence, yet his gentle wisdom and the undeniable evidence of Sarah's recovery held an immense, almost hypnotic power. He spoke of balance, of energy, of the interconnectedness of all living things, concepts alien to the Iron Scorpion's brutal creed. Razor, caught between his profound gratitude and his duty to his club, felt the pressure mounting. He saw the division, the unease, and knew he had to address it. He called a meeting, gathering the entire chapter in the main hall, a place usually reserved for solemn oaths or declarations of war. The air was thick with unspoken tension. "Brothers," Razor began, his voice firm, yet tinged with a new solemnity, "what we have witnessed, what we are witnessing, is a miracle. Sarah is alive, truly alive, because of this man." He gestured to the old man, who sat unobtrusively in a corner, his gaze calm. "He has taught us that there is more to strength than what we carry in our fists or under our seats. There is strength in the earth, in our bodies, in our minds." A tense silence followed. Then, Viper stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, President," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "we are the Iron Scorpions. We take what we want, we fight for what's ours. We don't meditate and eat grass. This isn't us. This old man, he's a charlatan, a snake oil salesman who got lucky. He's making us soft, Razor. And soft bikers don't survive on this highway." A chorus of grunts and murmurs of agreement rippled through Viper's faction. Hammer, though conflicted, remained silent, his gaze fixed on Razor, awaiting his response. Razor's eyes hardened, a flicker of his old self returning. "He saved my wife, Viper," he stated, his voice low and dangerous. "He showed us a path we never knew existed. You call it weakness, I call it a new kind of power. A power that can heal, not just destroy." He paused, looking directly at Viper. "Are you questioning my judgment, Viper?" The tension in the room was palpable, a silent challenge hanging between the two men. Viper, for all his ambition, knew the limits of open defiance. He backed down, but his resentment simmered, a dangerous undercurrent threatening to boil over. The old man, who had listened to the exchange with quiet detachment, now spoke, his voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. "Strength is not merely the ability to crush, but the ability to endure, to adapt, to heal," he said, his gaze sweeping over the assembled bikers. "Your bodies are machines of immense power, but even machines need the right fuel and maintenance. Your spirits are the engines, and they too need care. You have seen what happens when the body is neglected. What happens when the spirit is neglected?" His words, simple yet profound, resonated with some, while others remained stubbornly resistant. The internal conflict within the Iron Scorpions deepened, splitting the chapter into factions. Some, particularly the younger prospects like Spike, were genuinely intrigued by the old man's teachings. They saw the tangible benefits in Sarah's recovery and the newfound clarity in Razor's eyes. They began to experiment with the healthier diets, to practice the quiet meditations, and to spend time learning from the old man in his garden. Others, led by Viper and quietly supported by Hammer, viewed these changes as an affront to everything the Iron Scorpions stood for. They continued their usual habits, defiantly reveling in their greasy food, their loud music, and their aggressive posturing. The clubhouse, once a unified entity, became a battleground of ideologies, a place where the scent of exhaust fumes now mingled with the fresh aroma of herbs, and the roar of engines sometimes gave way to the quiet rustle of leaves. This internal strife, however, was not the only challenge facing the Iron Scorpions. News of Sarah's miraculous recovery, and the strange, quiet old man now residing with the formidable Hell's Angels chapter, had begun to spread like wildfire across the desolate highway. Rumors twisted and exaggerated the truth. Some spoke of a powerful shaman, others of a cult leader, and still others whispered of Razor's newfound weakness, and the Iron Scorpion's supposed decline into a peace-loving commune. Among those who heard these rumors were the Desert Vipers, a rival motorcycle gang notorious for their ruthlessness and their insatiable hunger for territory. Led by a brutal psychopath named Rattler, the Vipers had long coveted the Iron Scorpion's prime stretch of highway, but had always been deterred by Razor's legendary ferocity. Now, Rattler saw an opportunity. If Razor had truly gone soft, if his club was consumed by internal squabbles and strange spiritual practices, then the time was ripe to strike. A few weeks after Sarah's awakening, a scout from a neighboring town brought ominous news to the Iron Scorpions. Rattler and a formidable contingent of desert vipers had been spotted moving through their territory, their numbers unusually large, their intentions unmistakably hostile. The old man's peace, and Razor's attempts at internal reform, were about to be tested by the harsh realities of their world. The Iron Scorpions, once a unified force, now faced an external threat at a time of unprecedented internal division. The impossible had happened, but the true test of its meaning, and the profound lessons it held, were only just beginning to unfold. The news of the Desert Viper's approach electrified the Iron Scorpion's compound, cutting through the uneasy peace like a switchblade. The whispers of disunity and the quiet hum of the old man's garden were abruptly drowned out by the familiar clang of wrenches, the roar of engines, and the grim-faced preparations for war. For a moment, the old divisions seemed to vanish, replaced by the primal instinct for survival that had always defined their brotherhood. Yet, an undercurrent of tension remained. Razor, his face a granite mask, called an emergency meeting. The main hall, usually a scene of boisterous camaraderie or tense negotiation, was now grim and silent. The air crackled with anticipation. Hammer, his massive frame radiating an almost desperate eagerness for the fight, stood by Razor's side. Viper, however, lurked in the shadows, a sneer playing on his lips, his eyes darting between Razor and the old man, who sat quietly in his usual corner, seemingly unfazed by the impending storm. "Rattler is coming," Razor announced, his voice low but carrying an undeniable authority that resonated with years of command. "And he's bringing a small army. He thinks we're weak. He thinks we've gone soft." His gaze swept over the assembled bikers, lingering for a moment on Viper, then on the younger prospects. "We will show him he is wrong. But we will fight smarter, not just harder." This last statement hung in the air, a subtle nod to the old man's influence. Hammer grunted, a sound of reluctant agreement. Viper, however, scoffed. "Smarter? What, are we going to offer them herbal tea and talk about our feelings, Razor? This is war. We meet steel with steel, blood with blood." His words ignited a spark of agreement among his loyalists, their hands instinctively going to their weapons. Before Razor could respond, the old man's voice, calm and clear, cut through the tension. "War is a test of will, Viper," he said, his eyes meeting the younger man's with an unnerving intensity. "But also a test of wisdom. A warrior who understands his own body and the land he defends is far more formidable than one fueled only by rage." He rose slowly, moving towards a large map of their territory laid out on a table. "Rattler will come through here," he pointed to a narrow pass known as Serpent's Coil, confident in his numbers. "He expects a direct confrontation, a clash of brute force." Razor looked at the old man, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He had known this pass for decades, used it for ambushes in the past, but the old man's perspective brought a new dimension. "He expects us to defend the compound directly," Razor mused, "to fight on our home turf, but with our backs to the wall." "Precisely," the old man affirmed. "But the desert holds many secrets, many allies. The sun, the sand, the wind, they can be your weapons, your shield, your messengers. You know this land better than any outsider. Use it." Over the next 24 hours, the Iron Scorpions prepared, but not in the way Rattler would have anticipated. Under Razor's command, guided by the old man's insights, they began to set traps, not of explosives or barbed wire, but of the land itself. They dug shallow trenches along Rattler's likely path, designed to slow motorcycles and create confusion. They gathered specific desert plants, not for healing, but for their irritant properties, grinding them into a fine dust to be diffused by the wind. They prepared smoke signals that would not be visible to the Vipers, but would alert distant outposts of their own. Spike and the younger prospects, who had embraced the healthier lifestyle and the old man's teachings, worked with a newfound focus and discipline. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their senses sharpened, their bodies fueled by the pure food. They understood the old man's philosophy of using the environment, of fighting with intelligence rather than just brute force. Hammer, initially skeptical, watched in grudging admiration as the subtle, almost invisible preparations took shape. He saw the logic, the undeniable tactical advantage. Viper, however, remained openly defiant. He and his small faction insisted on traditional ambushes, on lining up their bikes for a full frontal assault. "This is cowardice, Razor," he spat, as he watched Razor and the old man discuss the precise timing of a sandstorm they hoped to leverage. "We are Hell's Angels. We don't hide like jackals in the sand. We adapt, Viper," Razor replied, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "We survive. And we win. You are welcome to fight your way, but you will fight alone if you disobey my orders." Viper seethed, but the gravity of Razor's tone, and the growing confidence among the other members, kept him from outright rebellion. He would participate in the main defense, but his heart was not in the subtle tactics. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her remarkable recovery. Though still confined to the compound, she was strong enough to walk, to sit outside, her eyes bright and filled with a renewed zest for life. She was a living beacon of the old man's power, a constant reminder to Razor of the profound choices he had made. Her presence, a quiet strength, underscored the true stakes of the impending battle, not just territory, but the very soul of the Iron Scorpions. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the third day, casting long, eerie shadows across the desert, the scouts reported the Desert Vipers were just hours away. The air grew heavy with anticipation. Razor gathered his men one last time. "Remember what the old man taught us," he said, his gaze firm. "Be aware. Be patient. Be one with the land. And protect our home." The Iron Scorpions took their positions, not in a grand display of force, but melted into the environment. Some were hidden in the rocky outcrops overlooking Serpent's Coil. Others were positioned to ride in flanking maneuvers, their engines silenced, waiting for the signal. The younger prospects, armed with slingshots and bags of irritant dust, took up positions to create chaos. Just before dawn, the rumble of approaching engines echoed through the pass. Rattler, a hulking figure on a customized chopper, led his Desert Vipers with arrogant confidence. They roared into Serpent's Coil, expecting to find the Iron Scorpions waiting in a traditional ambush. Instead, they found an eerie silence. Then, the desert itself seemed to turn against them. The old man, from a vantage point high above, signaled. A sudden, violent gust of wind, precisely timed by Razor's men, swept through the pass, carrying with it clouds of fine, stinging dust from the prepared plants. Motorcycles sputtered and choked, riders coughed and their eyes watered, momentarily blinded. Confusion erupted. Before the Vipers could recover, the Iron Scorpions struck. But it wasn't a head-on charge. It was a fluid, adaptive assault. Riders emerged from unexpected angles, using the terrain to their advantage, hitting the disoriented Vipers with precision and speed. The younger prospects, agile and quick, launched their irritant projectiles, adding to the chaos. Viper and his faction, caught off guard by these unconventional tactics, were initially hesitant. They wanted to charge, to fight directly, but the disarray of the Vipers made it difficult. Hammer, however, saw the effectiveness of Razor's strategy. He barked orders, directing his men to support the tactical strikes, his loyalty overriding his traditionalist instincts. Razor, astride his own powerful bike, moved like a phantom, a blur of leather and steel. He didn't seek out individual glory, he orchestrated the battle, his eyes constantly scanning, his mind adapting to every change. He fought with a new kind of ferocity, not born of blind rage, but of focused intent, fueled by a desire to protect his family and his reformed club. Rattler, enraged and disoriented, tried to rally his men, but the Desert Vipers were too spread out, too confused by the unconventional assault. They were being picked apart by an enemy they couldn't quite see or anticipate. The fighting was brutal, but the Iron Scorpions, fighting with a unity born of their shared purpose and a strategy born of the old man's wisdom, were clearly gaining the upper hand. It was during the height of the battle that Viper, frustrated by the lack of a direct, glorious charge, broke ranks. Seeing Rattler momentarily isolated, he decided to take matters into his own hands, to prove his own strength and show Razor's new methods were inferior. He revved his engine and charged, a lone wolf seeking a decisive kill. But Rattler, though disoriented, was still a dangerous opponent. As Viper bore down on him, Rattler's reflexes, honed by years of brutal combat, kicked in. He swerved, drew a concealed blade, and with a swift, brutal motion, plunged it into Viper's side as he passed. Viper cried out, his bike veering wildly before crashing into a rock face, silencing his ambitions forever. The sight of Viper's reckless charge and his swift, inglorious end served as a stark lesson to the remaining traditionalists. It was a brutal affirmation of the old man's words: rage alone was not enough, wisdom and adaptation were paramount for survival. Hammer, witnessing Viper's demise, felt a cold dread, but also a renewed respect for Razor's foresight. The battle raged for another hour, but the tide had turned irrevocably. The Desert Vipers, demoralized and outmaneuvered, began to break ranks and flee. Rattler, wounded and defeated, was finally cornered by Razor and Hammer. "You thought we were soft, Rattler?" Razor growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You thought we had forgotten how to fight? We just learned to fight better." Rattler, seeing the cold, intelligent fury in Razor's eyes, knew his reign of terror over this highway was over. He was captured, along with the remnants of his shattered gang. As the sun rose fully, casting a golden glow over the victorious Iron Scorpions, the compound erupted in cheers. The cost had been high, Viper and a few others were lost, but the victory was undeniable, and it had been achieved not just through force, but through intelligence, unity, and an unexpected wisdom. Back at the compound, the old man, who had watched the battle unfold from afar, approached the returning bikers. His eyes were not triumphant, but filled with a quiet understanding. Razor dismounted, his face streaked with sweat and grime, but his eyes shone with a new clarity. He looked at the old man, a profound gratitude radiating from him. "You saved us all," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The old man simply smiled. "I merely showed you the path," he replied softly. "You chose to walk it. You chose to heal, not just your wife, but your spirit, and the spirit of your brotherhood. The earth provides, Razor. It provides strength, healing, and wisdom, if only you listen." Sarah, now fully recovered, walked out to meet them, her face radiant, her presence a living testament to the miracle. She hugged Razor tightly, then turned to the old man, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave me my life back." The old man nodded, his gaze lingering on Sarah, then sweeping over the Hell's Angels, who now looked at him with unreserved awe and respect. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a deep understanding. "My work here is done," he declared, his voice carrying a gentle finality. "The seed has been planted. It is up to you to nurture it." He turned to leave, walking calmly towards the desolate highway from which he had appeared. Razor moved to stop him. "Wait. Where will you go? Who are you?" The old man paused, turning to face them one last time. His face, etched with wrinkles, seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. "I am simply a steward of forgotten knowledge," he said. "There are many places where the earth's wisdom is needed. And as for who I am, perhaps I am merely an echo of what you already know, but had forgotten." With a final, serene smile, he continued his journey, disappearing into the shimmering heat haze of the horizon, as mysteriously as he had arrived. The Iron Scorpions watched him go, a profound silence descending upon them. They knew they would never see him again, but his lessons, and the miracle he had brought, would forever be etched into their souls. In the weeks and months that followed, the Iron Scorpions underwent a profound transformation. Razor, though still the formidable president, led with a new kind of authority, one tempered by wisdom and compassion. The clubhouse, while still a stronghold, became a place of balance. The roaring engines and boisterous laughter returned, but they were now interspersed with periods of quiet reflection, with healthier meals, and with a deeper respect for their environment. The small garden the old man had started flourished, tended by Spike and other prospects who had fully embraced the new way. Sarah, fully vibrant and healthy, became a symbol of their new path, a constant reminder that true strength came from within, from health, and from a connection to the natural world. She used her renewed life to help others, turning a section of the clubhouse into a small, informal clinic where she applied the old man's herbal remedies and wisdom to the ailments of the local community, slowly healing the very land that had once feared them. Hammer, though still a man of steel, found himself meditating occasionally, and even encouraging healthier eating among the older members. The Iron Scorpions, while still a force to be reckoned with on the highway, were no longer defined solely by their aggression. They were feared, yes, but also respected for their resilience, their unity, and the unexpected wisdom that had saved them. They had learned that the most potent medicine was not always found in a pill, or even in a fist, but in the earth itself, and in the profound, often quiet, lessons of an old man who simply asked to be fed. The impossible had happened, and in its wake, a new legend was born on the desolate stretches of that forgotten highway.